Queer Identities in the Work and Life of Christopher Marlowe. When I started at Regis University in the fall of 2016, I thought I knew all there was to know about Shakespeare. In the spring of my freshman year, I took Dr. Palmer's Comedies and Tragedies class, without permission. If memory serves, I believe that the conversation went something like this. Me. Dr. Palmer, I see you teach this class. I've been performing Shakespeare for years. Can I register for your class in the spring? Daryl. No. Me. Oh yeah, okay, fair enough. So I registered for the course and showed up on the first day of the semester. Dr. Palmer was less than thrilled to see me, I'm sure, but I think I grew on him rather like a fungus. We would perform bits of plays in class, and I was always the overzealous freshman ready to show up the seniors, who, by the way, were in their spring semester and therefore anything but zealous. Seeing my love for the language, Dr. Palmer convinced me to join the English major, and I took his EN 300 course. He began to force me to read. We read John Donne, and I looked at him daftly as he kept saying the words metaphysical and poetry together. But then, finally, Christopher Marlowe, the final roadblock before we reached the Shakespeare section of the course. Kit Marlowe's life was a barrel of worms that I had yet to venture into at this point in my life, and I found myself unexpectedly taken aback. Now, who is Kit Marlowe? We know him as a spy, a flamboyantly homosexual man who loved to drink, and for the mysterious circumstances that so abruptly ended his life. However, he was also a poet and a playwright, who was well beloved for his verse and the hilarity of his over-the-top plays. Unfortunately, one can successfully argue that we spend more time examining his life than we do his work. Kit was actually one of Shakespeare's contemporaries. He would like everyone to remember that he was exactly 2 months older than William Shakespeare. It is also worth noting that in Marlowe's debut play, Tamburlaine the Great, he wrote Iambic Pentameter. He was, before his time, a hipster true. Kit and Will were worthy business adversaries. But which of the facts surrounding Kit's life and death are true, and which are facts that have been enhanced for the interest of the public? During his early life, Marlowe attended King's School in Canterbury, and then, at age 16, received a scholarship to attend Cambridge. However, before he could receive his master's degree from Cambridge, the university balked for unknown reasons. Upon reception of a letter directly to Cambridge from the Privy Council, aka Queen Elizabeth's inner circle of confidants and advisors, Marlowe was allowed to be conferred his master's degree on time. In the letter, the Privy Council cited that Marlowe must receive his degree due to matters touching the benefit of his country, according to Joseph Pearce, The Quest for Shakespeare. In Christopher Marlowe, Renaissance Dramatist, Lisa Hopkins relays the entirety of the Privy Council's words exactly. Whereas it was reported that Christopher Marlowe was determined to have gone beyond the seas to Rheims and there to remain, their lordships thought good to certify that he had no such intent, but that in all his action he had behaved himself orderly and discreetly, whereby he had done her majesty good service, and deserved to be rewarded for his faithful dealing. Their lordships' request was that the rumour thereof should be allayed by all means, and that he should be furthered in the degree he was to take this next commencement, because it was not her majesty's pleasure that anyone employed, as he had been, in matters touching the benefit of his country, should be defamed by those that are ignorant in the affairs he went about. Okay, let's be clear. There was not much about Kit Marlowe that one could describe as orderly or discreet. The demand that the rumor should thereof be allayed by all possible means is an interesting one too. Are they referencing the rumor of Marlowe's atheism? Well, that wasn't really a rumor, as he practically screeched it from the rooftops. Perhaps the rumor of his homosexuality. It's possible. However, the council's letter references Marlowe going beyond the seas to Rheims, which is, according to Hopkins, the place in France where many young Englishmen would go to study before joining the Catholic priesthood. Now, if you remember, Queen Elizabeth was the famous Protestant queen who supposedly liberated England from oppressive Catholicism. If Marlowe had been training for the priesthood, though, why did the Privy Council defend him? Also, why would a man who was known for converting other men to atheism train to become a priest? Well, Hopkins is among many other scholars who advocate for the fact that Marlowe was in Rheims to spy on the treasonous Brits, training to become Catholic priests. William Empson is a scholar quoted as believing that Marlowe's time in Rheims is actually what inspired his infamous play The Life and Tragedy of Dr. Faustus, as there are many dopey-eyed priests pictured in that mega 16th century hit. Now, how does all of this relate back to Marlowe being a gender-defying, flaming homosexual? Good question. For one, Andrew Dixon points out that we have the famous note from another confirmed spy, one Richard Baines, who proclaimed that Kit disdained of all who didn't love tobacco and boys. Oh, Kit. On top of that, we can also look at his final unfinished erotic poem, Hero and Leander. Both of those names resemble names of Shakespearean characters to come, Hero from Much Ado and Lysander from Midsummer, and the poem does technically focus on a heterosexual couple. But Marlowe places a speaker in the poem who is not afraid to delve into the homoerotic. Many Renaissance poets used the tool of creating a speaker in a poem who was quote-unquote not the poet to exonerate themselves from allegations of heresy and other things. In Hero and Leander, Marlowe has his speaker say of Leander, how smooth his breast was, how white his belly, and whose immortal fingers did imprint that heavenly path with many a curious dint that runs along his back, but my rude pen can hardly blazon forth the loves of men. Heavily sexualizing the body of the man was not necessarily uncommon in Elizabethan poetry, but placing the speaker's I in the line, that heavenly path that runs along his back, but my rude pen can hardly blazon forth the loves of men, was definitely unusual. Though Marlowe could have easily countered any allegations of the homoerotic or homosexual by saying, "It's not me, it's the speaker, it's poetry for God's sakes," we have to acknowledge that being willing to sexualize other men in poetry was a daring step and not necessarily the most common at the time. So, what do we term this willingness to disparage God, to love on men through poetry, and to proclaim a love of tobacco and boys? Well, I haven't got an answer for that today, but I am going to talk about the latter 2 points. Many scholars today will harp away on the wild 29 years that Marlowe spent on this earth. They will write odysseys of what he must have been doing in France, of who the character of Dr. Faustus is based upon, and they will label him a spy. Today, I want to move at least a little bit beyond that. I want to add to the conversation started by C.R. Forker about how Marlowe adopted and wrote about masculine love. Referenced explicitly in some of Marlowe's poetry, including From the Passionate Shepherd to His Love, Marlowe effeminizes the character of his male speaker. He creates a loving we of male-identified people, using phrases such as, "Come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove, and I will make thee beds of roses and 1,000 fragrant posies, a cap of flowers and a kirtle." In this excerpt of The Passionate Shepherd to His Love, Marlowe confounds the 16th century listener. For one to ask one's love to come live with them and be thy love, one is taking on the role of the woman. Women are nesters, women settle the home. And yet the lover that Marlowe speaks of is also effeminized when Marlowe writes, "And I will make thee beds of roses, a cap of flowers, and a kirtle." A cap of flowers is the modern equivalent of a flower crown. I attempted to look up what the original meaning of kirtle was on the Oxford English Dictionary, but Regis no longer has an account with them, so I settled with the Cambridge Online Dictionary, which states that a kirtle is a kind of dress, skirt, or tunic worn by women or men. This is a purposefully ambiguous piece of clothing. What we do know, however, is that this particular piece is flowy and can be worn by women. It's not the peacocking style of clothing that the men of the Elizabethan and Jacobean periods ascribed to so much of the time. And so, suddenly, we have 2 effeminized male lovers in this poem. I want to take C.R. Forker's point that Marlowe wrote about masculine love and move it a step forward by saying that Christopher Marlowe renovated the English Renaissance through his consistent use of masculine love. I am arguing that without the Leanders, without the Faustus' relationship with the Mephistopheles, without the character of the passionate shepherd, we never get to have an Orlando and a Rosalind. We never get our Orsino and Viola, and we certainly don't get our Antonio and our Sebastian. Kit had a great bit to do with all the gender swapping in Shakespeare's plays, as only through Marlowe's masterpieces did the world of Elizabethan England come to know or basically comprehend gender fluidity. He set the stage in many ways for the Queen to delight in women playing men in love with men, which was a situation that Shakespeare took home for payday. Though Kit only left us with 7 plays due to his premature death, he has forever shaped the way in which our stages play out masculine love. All in all, Kit Marlowe was an unequivocal linguist genius. He had an ear for love that we can only hope to recreate someday, and his subversive nature bled into his works. He was the master of making people love queer love poetry and stories without knowing it, and we have much of our beloved gender-swapped canon to thank him for.